Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are, everybody. My name is Bren T, and I'm a trustee with the Buffalo Presidential Center, and also a master docent with Explore Buffalo. And so for us to come up with such a timely topic as contested presidential elections, and to show it here at the Buffalo History Museum, it just gives me a great deal of pleasure to do that. And once again, I do see some people here in the audience who may have snuck in. But we won't go any further than that. I'm not going to take that any further. I'm not going to tell. Okay. So here we are. The title of this presentation is Contested Presidential Elections. First of all, I think I have to say that I'm not an expert on the topic, but I have learned quite a bit about it, and I hope that I'll be able to share that in a way that's understandable, because the Electoral College and the election process is pretty complicated. So first off, let me just start off with a few basics about the Electoral College. Let's remember that the Electoral College is not a place, it's a process. And the Founding Fathers established the Electoral College in the Constitution as part of a compromise. They didn't know whether to elect a president by popular vote or have Congress decide who was going to be president. And so they actually decided that Congress would, and that's when they came up with the idea in the Constitution as the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College consists of 538 electors, not the congressmen themselves, but the electors. And each state has a number that's consistent with the number of representatives that they have in the House, plus 2 senators. So every state has that particular number. And then Washington, D.C., they have 3 automatically, 1 representative and 2 senators that represent Washington, D.C. So the winner needs to get 270 electoral votes. I think we all know that. We've heard enough about it. So when we vote in November, we're actually voting for state electors, and those electors, they pledge, they vow to vote for whoever gets the most number of votes in their state. So it's basically a popular vote in that state, and the electors vote when they get to the Electoral College. It's a winner-take-all kind of situation, and the only time they really vary from that is in the states of Maine and Nebraska, and those 2 states have a sliding scale. So I think we're going to go on and to the PowerPoint now. And I think it's really important for us to know that presidential elections in the United States are not popular vote contests. The writers of the Constitution configured the process so that only the members of the House of Representatives would be elected by popular vote. And they said at first that senators would be elected by state legislators, and the Electoral College would elect the President of the United States. In 1913, the senators, there was an amendment number 17, which was ratified in 1913, that said that senators from now on would be elected by the popular vote. But they also said that they would continue with the Electoral College system in the presidential election. So the Electoral College is made up of representatives who are generally selected by the political parties at state conventions. Many of the electors, we don't know their names. There are a couple in New York State that we are very familiar with. You may have heard that Byron Brown and Hillary Clinton were electors from New York State. There's the minimum electoral votes a state can have is 3. That's like the Washington, D.C. And California has the most. I think there's 55 electoral votes coming from California. And as it says right here on the slide, there have been actually 6 amendments over the millennia that have dealt with voting rights, that have expanded the notion of who can vote. The 15th Amendment is all men, 17th, senators, 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote 100 years ago. The 23rd Amendment allowed DC to vote. And the 24th Amendment said no poll taxes could deny someone the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment allowed citizens 18 and over to vote. So you see there have been a lot of changes and a lot of interaction with regard to elections in this country over the years. That said, let's move on, because there have been many contested elections, and it really goes beyond contested, because the first group that we're going to talk about is that number of elections where the president did not get the popular vote. He won the electoral vote, but not the popular vote. Do you want to take it? Maybe some of you know, you've researched it. Do you know how many of these elections over the years have we've elected a president who didn't get the popular vote? Oh, are you gonna answer a question again? No, it's not 3. Yeah, the lady in the red coat. I remember you from last time, right? Yeah. So what do you think? 5. Yes, indeed. There have been 5 contested presidential elections in our history, if we want to define contested as winning the popular or losing the popular vote and winning the election. But only 5 when the elected president did not win the popular vote. So the first group we're going to talk about is those 5 elections that were where the presidents lost the popular vote and still became president. The first one was in 1824. Some people say, wow, that's like almost 100 years ago. Yeah, it was really the 10th presidential election, and the popular vote really had no effect until this particular election. Until then, presidential candidates were chosen by Congress, and all of the states had chosen to leave the choice of which candidate would receive their electoral votes up to their state legislators. In 1824, however, there was a little bit of a problem, because Andrew Jackson won the popular vote, receiving 38,000 more, and he also won the electoral vote. However, Andrew Jackson he only had 84 electoral votes, but he needed 123 in order to have a majority and to win the election. So what happened is John Quincy Adams ended up winning the presidency despite not winning either the popular vote or the electoral vote, and that hadn't happened before or since. But what happened is that Henry Clay, who himself was a candidate for president, threw his support when it went to Congress over to John Quincy Adams. So John Quincy Adams was selected by a majority of the state electors in the House, so then he became president. So that was the first example in 1824 of an election where the popular vote winner was not elected president. Now we go on to 1876, and if you want to talk about a disputed, a controversial election with real fraud and real intimidation and even lynchings that went on, let's talk about 1876. Hayes, Rutherford P. Hayes, won the election by a margin of just one electoral vote. Even though, and he lost the popular vote by more than 250,000 to Samuel Tilden. But once again, Tilden won the electoral vote, but he was just one shy of electoral votes needed to defeat his rival, Governor Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio. So what happened is there was 4 states where there was, actually 3 states that Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina, where things were in disarray. There was big disputes, and if you think in 2020, there were disputes there. This, with all of the fraud and the intimidation and everything that was going on in those states, both sides were claiming victory. And let's remember, we vote in November. Well, basically, it ended up in a stalemate, and a joint session of Congress met on February 1st, and to try to decide a winner, but they couldn't decide a winner because the Senate was led by Republicans and they weren't going to budge, and the House was led by Democrats and they weren't going to budge. Sound familiar? Yeah. And so what they did, they met 15 different times over the next month and trying to settle this dispute. And what they did is they set up an electoral commission. They appointed some people to this commission, and they finally, after 115 days, March 2nd, they finally decided that so long as Republicans under Hayes, if Hayes was going to be appointed, then the Republicans needed to promise that they would remove all federal troops from the South and end the horrible Reconstruction Acts which had been placed on the southern states. And so Rutherford B. Hayes from Ohio, he was an ardent abolitionist, and he was in favor of that anyway. So with that particular compromise of 1877, the Democrats conceded the election to Hayes in return for an end to Reconstruction and withdrawal of all troops from the South. You see that little cartoon there on the lower end, the lower right? That was done by Thomas Nast on February 17th, so kind of in the middle of this period of 1877. And he was the most influential political cartoonist and satirist of the 19th century. And what he says under the caption, with a little wink, he said, if you're looking at that with one hand on top of the other, on top of the gun, on top of the agreement, it says, this was a truce, not a compromise, but a chance for high-toned gentlemen to retire gracefully from their very civil declarations of war. So this was this was bad stuff then. And we want to keep that in mind, moving forward. So the next time we had an election whereby the popular vote did not rule was in 1888. And of course you recognize Grover Cleveland there in 1888. He had won in 1884, won the popular vote and the electoral vote. But in 1888, running against Republican Benjamin Harrison, Harrison, although he lost by 90,000 votes, and Benjamin won by 90,000 votes, Harrison received 233 electoral votes to Grover Cleveland's 168, so he won. And one of the very interesting things is that, Grover Cleveland married Frances Folsom Cleveland in 1886, and they were in the White House, and so Frances became the youngest First Lady ever. As they were leaving the White House, she said to people, I don't know whether she said it to Mrs. Harrison or not, but she said, don't change anything here because we'll be back in 4 years. And Cleveland did win in 1892, making him the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms, despite having won the popular vote in 84, 88, and 92. So then we punch forward to 2000, over 100 years, before we again run into a situation where the winner of the popular vote, in this case Al Gore, loses to George W. Bush. But this was a razor-thin margin. Just 437 votes in Florida separated the two for its 25 electoral votes. But Bush 43 was declared the winner of the general election, even though he didn't win the popular vote either, even though Gore had won by over 500,000 votes. They had a little problem in Florida. Maybe some of you remember talking about the Chads in Palm Beach County. They had a problem with the voting machines, and they weren't pushing pushing through the holes far enough, and the Chads were hanging, and so they wanted to dispute the votes in Palm Beach County. Well, that went on for a while, and they did some revotes and so forth, and then the Supreme Court came in and said, Bush is the winner. So that's the way it happened, and that never happened before going to the Supreme Court. So those were the results in 2000, and the last one was just the last time out, where Hillary Clinton had almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but Donald Trump won the electoral vote by 304 to 227, even though Trump lost the popular vote. So this was the 5th time in our 228-year history that this has happened. Okay, so that particular section of the presentation was talking about, who won the popular vote versus the electoral vote. But now I would like to talk a little bit more about, what we might consider contested elections. And there have been many controversial ones. Remember, I just talked about that one in 1876 with Hayes winning over Tilden. But I'm saying that 1860 has to be arguably the most contentious, the most controversial, the most disturbing, because there were actually 4 different parties that were running for president that year. You had the Southern and the Northern Democrats, which those two split the Democratic vote, allowing Abraham Lincoln to win with only 39.8% of the popular vote. So they clearly had a big impact on the winner. And then the Constitutional Union Party with Bell and Everett had 12% of the vote. So you see how it was already split up in terms of popular vote, like whatever. And of course, the split led to the South seceding and the Civil War. In my view, you can't get much more controversial than that. But there are others. We can go all the way back to 1800. And in that presidential election, that was the fourth presidential election. It was held from October 31st to December 3rd, 1800. And what was sometimes referred to as the Revolution of 1800, Vice President Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republican Party defeated incumbent President John Adams of the Federalist Party. And now we've got, despite the warnings of Washington, we've got political parties that are shaping up. And there was a political realignment, if you will. And so the Democratic Republican leadership takes over from the Federalist leadership. Now, Adams, in 1896, barely defeated Jefferson in the election, but under the rules of the electoral system at that time, each member of the Electoral College cast 2 votes. And there was no distinction between electoral votes for president and electoral votes for vice president. And so Jefferson received the second most votes in 1796, so he was elected vice president. And in 1800, unlike in 1796, both parties formally nominated tickets. And so what happened ultimately is at the end of a long and dirty and bitter campaign, Jefferson and Burr each won 73 electoral votes, and Adams won 65 and Pinckney 64. And if you think the press is dirty, if you think the politics are dirty today, listen to this quote from a newspaper in 1800. They said of Jefferson, "A godless Jacobin revolutionary who will engage in murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest, which will be openly taught and practiced." Can you imagine anything like that being said today, even on the internet? So, but in the end, what happens is Jefferson is elected. And that did lead to a change in the election laws. It also deepened the conflict between Burr and Hamilton. And 4 years later, in 1804, you see and you recall that Burr shot Hamilton and killed him in a duel in 1804. So, if you have any doubts about whether those early elections were controversial, contested, whatever you want to call them, they've been nasty for a long time, I guess is my point. Let's move on to 1948. Maybe some of you have seen this photo, and Harry Truman is holding up a copy of the Chicago Tribune, which had declared Thomas Dewey the winner. So they jumped the gun and announced the front runner ahead of time. Actually, pollsters had predicted Dewey ahead by 5 points just 2 days prior to the election, and Truman went to bed early thinking that he had lost. Somebody woke him up early in the morning and said, "Guess what? Those polls weren't right." Sound familiar? I think yes. So he woke up in the morning, his aides woke him up and said, "Guess what? You won." So that was fun. I mean, can we call it contested? It's maybe, but it's more fun than anything else. Let's see here. And then there's the election of 1860. This was close and it was controversial. And, you know, today things might have gone differently. But back in those days, Kennedy won 22 states with 303 electoral votes, and the popular vote by just 17/100ths%. He captured the Northeast and the cities, kind of like today, and Nixon won the South and the West and the rural and the suburban. And also because Kennedy was a Catholic, that played a role in the election too. And it was said that there was a lot of fraudulent behavior in voting in 1960. In Chicago in particular, Mayor Daley supposedly used his influence, pushing the unions and everyone to vote for Kennedy. And actually in Texas, because Johnson was a Texan and he was known for pulling a few strings, they think that the close votes in both Texas and Illinois could have gone either way. But say what you will about Richard Nixon, at that particular time, he had good reason to believe that fraud was involved in both Illinois and Texas. Yet, and even though his staff urged him to not accept the results, to challenge them, Nixon decided not to pursue legal remedies. He thought it would damage the country and would damage the democratic process. So there we have some controversial ones. But now I want to go on to a third section, very brief, but one I think that I really felt that I had to mention, because we have had a lot of third-party candidates over the years who have muddied the results. And I just want to toss out three of them at this particular time. Millard Fillmore, Buffalonian, who in 1856 was the candidate of the American or Know Nothing Party, got almost 875,000 votes. That was like 21% of the popular vote. And even though he only got one state, the state of Delaware, it probably did not affect the outcome of the race. The fact that he got that many votes as a third-party candidate was pretty amazing for that period of time. And then we move on to 1912. Theodore Roosevelt, of course, was upset with President Taft, his successor. He thought Taft was a wuss, and so when he came back from Africa and all his travels, he wanted to get back into the ring. My hat's in the ring, so to speak. And so he went to the Republican convention, and they refused to go along with Roosevelt. They stuck with Taft. And so Roosevelt, of course, ran off and started his own party, had his own convention. That was the Progressive Party, and ended up splitting the Republican vote. Wilson wins by a large majority of electoral votes, but TR, as a progressive, had 27% of the popular vote. So, once again, it may not have affected the election. Don't really know if he had thrown his support back to Taft, or if he had run himself instead of Taft. And then in 1992, here's another one. Ross Perot, an independent candidate, garnered nearly 20 million votes, which prevented George H.W. Bush from being reelected. Certainly there have been other third-party candidates. Another one that comes to mind is Ralph Nader in 2000, running in the Green Party. Some say that stole the election from Al Gore. So you can look back over history. Third parties have been running. Third and fourth and fifth and sixth parties have been running in elections mostly to make statements for well over 150 years. And while we're at it, I just want to show you that we do have memorabilia out there. Some of you know me as a collector, and and I'm always interested in collectible presidential things. Well, here's some collectible things, pins from various elections and that related to electors. There you see that shield of voting for president-elector in 1940 for Roosevelt. The unpledged electors for States' Rights Party, that comes from 1948. And there was a Dixiecrat candidate. States' rights candidate, Strom Thurmond, okay, that came back to me. So a lot of people broke and went for Strom Thurmond in 48. Here we have another one, presidential electors button from 1992, and a bunch of people signed it for Gore and Clinton. And then there's one from 1960, Nixon, Kennedy, vote states' rights, unpledged electors. So that's another states' rights Southern group expressing their views in 1960. And how about this? Here's something from 2020. There's actually a ballot. Just saw these two things from friends of mine yesterday. They popped up. And one was a delegate from Pennsylvania. And you can see on your left the Electoral College official ballot for Biden and Harris in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania on Monday, December 14th, which, by the way, was yesterday. And this guy even produced his mask, the Electoral College mask from 2020. How many people wouldn't love to have their hands on something like this? It's just so cool, and it really represents 2020 and all that's been going on. So I want to leave you with a couple of questions to ponder. I know some people in here might want to answer this question, but this is for those of you in the audience out there. Do you think that 2020 was more or less contentious than others, and if so, which others? Good conversation maybe for some classes, university or high school classes. And also, does the presidential election process need to change? And so these are things that really I'm sure we're thinking about at this point in time, especially this particular year with all the controversy. And so I just want to leave with that. Hey, wait a minute. You in the brown jacket, where are you going? You're not allowed to sneak out early. I've got one more slide here, and it's really important. So just sit down for a second and look at my last slide. Thank you. As I said before, I'm a trustee with the Buffalo Presidential Center, and that's our website at the top of the page, buffalopresidentialcenter.org. We're really happy to announce that after a long time, we've finally moved into a beautiful museum space on the second floor of the Central Library. We have permanent and rotating exhibits. The permanent exhibits deal with all the presidents that have a connection to Buffalo, including some special exhibits on Fillmore and Cleveland and McKinley and Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. We have, if you go around the room, you have pictorial informational wall panels and all around the perimeter of the room. And then we have display cases. We have 8 display cases. 6 of them are part of the permanent display. These are original artifacts that were used in campaigns for the most part. You do have some memorial artifacts in there for McKinley and Lincoln and Fillmore and so forth. But we have original artifacts that go back to the 1850s. You're going to want to see those. And we also have a couple of display cases that are revolving. And they're not so political, they're more fun. And the exhibit that we have on there right now is donkeys and elephants. And you'd be surprised how long donkeys and elephants have been a part of our political system. But it's a really fun one, and we're going to keep it on a little bit longer because, as you know, the Buffalo Presidential Center cannot open now like a lot of museums. But certainly when we reopen, when things get better, we hope that you'll stop in. And the next revolving exhibit, after donkeys and elephants, it's going to be pets in the White House. That'll be a fun topic for kids. You'll all love to come and see that one. So we do hope to see you. We opened in November, but we were only open for one day before they shut down. But we hope to see you sometime in the spring. You're going to love coming to look at what we have in there because it's so broad-based and it's so much fun. We look forward to seeing you there. So, wrapping it up, hey, Mr. Browncoat, you can leave now if you want to. Appreciate your coming, although I do realize you snuck in. And ma'am, it's good to see you again too. You should get a gold star for answering that question right. And we really appreciate our time here and with Matt and everybody here at the Buffalo History Museum. And good luck. We'll see you the next time.